Next slide. All right, the next one, some of you may be familiar with this. Some have seen it before in some of the presentations we've given in the past, but once again, just making sure that everyone is aware of the overall process, kind of at a high level of where we are and what we are doing. I mentioned CERCLA and how it really guides a lot of the actions that we perform on contaminated sites throughout the nation. Here in St. Louis, we're focused a lot on the remedial action phase, which is actually the far right portion of the slide. Remedial design, of course, for the overall site's complete, and now we're in that remedial action phase. That actually is comprised of many different activities that crews will be performing on a normal basis to go from the actual remediation, and that also includes the investigation and the overall sampling process to get to a point where we can do remediation on a lot of these sites. So a significant piece of overall time and effort is dedicated to that portion right there where we are at. And we will eventually get to some sort of project completion and site closeout for the sites. And then at the end of the process goes to long-term management with the Department of Energy, the Long-Term Management Office. Some of the sites throughout the nation have been through this phase or in different phases of been through this overall process and maybe in different phases of CERCLA throughout this. And once again, mentioned that for our sites here in St. Louis in that remedial action phase. Next slide. I had mentioned the overall national program. This is a picture from one of our recent annual reports that gets sent out. I believe the one that's currently for FY24 has a little bit of an updated picture. So this one was from the 23 report, but it gives a snapshot of the overall program and what the Corps of Engineers at large is doing from a FUSRAP perspective and all of the contaminated sites that we are addressing via our authority under FUSRAP. Our sites you see there on the far left is part of Mississippi Valley Division, and our specific sites there in the St. Louis region being the downtown site and the North St. Louis County sites. Next. Drilling down even further from the national program to our program here in St. Louis and what we manage, we have the St. Louis sites, of course, highlighted there with the North St. Louis County sites and the St. Louis downtown site. Also, part of our environmental portfolio in FUSRAP is the Iowa Army Ammunition Plant, where we have activities going on there as part of our FUSRAP as well. So that's something that we just mentioned, but as of course, the focus here tonight is the St. Louis FUSRAP sites.
Pause for a minute. Just verify that other teams.
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead just to making sure. I believe we have a couple others monitoring on the line just to make sure that they can see the slides, and I have confirmed that they can. So I want to make sure that everyone's able to see it. There may be some lag in showing on the other end from what we're seeing here in the room. We'll try to account for that. Okay. All right, next slide. As far as the theme of what we're doing, drilling down a little further, now I'm giving you a little more specifics associated with each individual site. We have the downtown site there listed as far as spatial awareness in downtown St. Louis at Mallinckrodt and the vicinity properties around there. And then here where we are sitting right now, the St. Louis Airport site, just north of St. Louis Airport, along Coldwater Creek here, and then the St. Louis Airport site vicinity properties surrounding the area. Quite a bit of acreage that it does cover, that covered in the very beginning, as well as the Coldwater Creek and the floodplain that's associated with it, extending all the way to the Missouri River. And that's a significant challenge that we are well equipped within the Corps of Engineers and personnel that we have. It's been the question's been asked many times, and we've kind of answered as far as what we have, a number of personnel. At any given day, you can count around 120 personnel on site and the St. Louis Airport site vicinity properties that are pretty much dedicated to executing this mission. Meaning that there's a lot of different personnel day in and day out that really do care about the project that we are executing here and making sure that we are doing everything in accordance with the authority that I cited and delivering for the community. So that kind of goes into the Laddie Avenue properties, that area there, just off Laddie Avenue, that we are close to being completed on that one, where there will be some potential institutional controls on that area. But the majority of remedial action is a little bit about that later. And then once again, citing our actual authority, cleaning up that acronym again, MEDAEC, once again, Manhattan Engineering District and Atomic Energy Commission waste for our FUSRAP sites. Sometimes you get questions as well about other contaminants and if they are part of the MEDAEC process, and if they are commingled with the actual radioactive contamination, then that's something that we would clean up as well. Next slide. Okay. As mentioned in the overview and the sites we manage here in the St. Louis district as part of the St. Louis sites, the first one we'll talk about tonight with the overview and kind of just a general update of activities that we have going on as a St. Louis downtown site. Helping with the spatial awareness, you can see the yellow highlighted area where the record of decision boundary is for the St. Louis downtown site and its relation to some of the features in downtown, like the bridges there, like the Stan Musial Bridge and the McKinley Bridge there. Next slide. The St. Louis downtown site and the vicinity properties kind of surrounding the Mallinckrodt area there, highlighted on the figure, where you can see a lot of our activities over the years have been focused at the Mallinckrodt site, and then some of the vicinity properties around there. Most recently, some of the remedial action we've completed there, as far as significant actions. One of the things there, the actual Kiesel property mentioned there, kind of the southern portion of the site. And this is just a testament to the overall program to include the downtown site and the North St. Louis County sites, where we have coordinated with individual property owners to identify opportunities to work with them and go in and do remediation, trying to make sure that we are doing things in accordance with our scheduling activities, as well as working with them on the best course of action to go and attack some of these areas of contamination. So once again, that goes for the downtown site and the North St. Louis County sites. The downtown site has slowed down over the years as far as accessible areas to go and do remediation. That's why you'll see the difference in amount of cubic yardage that comes from the downtown site versus the SLAPS VPs, where we'll be talking about in a little bit. That kind of shows you the overall progress that we have made there at the St. Louis downtown site, and now working on some of those hard to get areas that have the opportunity to go back and make sure we can get as much as possible from a contamination standpoint till we get to that point on that previous slide with the circler, where we eventually get to a kind of a site closeout part of the process. Next slide. So that was the downtown site, and a reminder that you can go ahead and put questions in the chat, and we'll address those as we move to the question and answer process, and we can always refer back to slides. But just as well, just keeping moving and going through the actual from the St. Louis downtown site to the North St. Louis County sites. Some of these slides are very similar to what I presented 2 weeks ago. We had our first St. Louis Airport site community advisory group meeting with the help of the EPA. And I did want to mention, I failed to mention up that we definitely appreciate the effort of all of our partners to include EPA and their overall involvement and and also their dedication as well to the mission that we have here for FUSRAP, for the St. Louis sites and other sites that we manage. But it's an overall process where we make sure we're keeping all of our other partners and the regulatory agencies engaged, informed, and part of the overall process to help that move forward with just kind of a real whole of government approach to make sure that we're all understanding of the process and doing things in accordance with our authority. The history of the North St. Louis County sites, these are a lot of the wording here is from, I mentioned earlier, the record of decision, as well as our community involvement plan that we have that's available for view on the website that goes through some of these specifics and how we got to where we are today. I wanted to point out where we're at in the process and how some of these sites came to be contaminated. So this doesn't include a lot of the history from the St. Louis downtown site, because this is a little more focused on the North St. Louis County sites. But if you weren't aware that some of the activities that happened back in the day, that AEC, that's that acronym, Atomic Energy Commission, where they acquired the land and then started storing materials at the St. Louis airport site. Of course, it's right next to Coldwater Creek. And then as you move forward in the actual process of the timeline there into 66 and 70, you can see where some of the materials were actually purchased by a private company and moved from SLAPs to the Laddie Avenue, which came to be known as the Hazelwood Interim Storage Site, or HISS. And then there's some other changes of hands, if you will, and private companies getting possession of the residues, shipping them different places like Cannon City, Colorado. That overall process, that time frame of history, you look back, the controls that were used or lack thereof, much different than we use today. For instance, a lot of the activities that we do are to make sure that we are not spreading any contamination when we're moving it from areas that we're excavating to our loadout area, and also when we are shipping the cars out on our rail cars. So the activities and transporting and mechanisms for storage that were used back in the day have contributed significantly to the challenges we face today. That very bottom portion there, you can see where the residues migrated from SLAPs and the areas there via surface water runoff and areas around the haul routes, as well as going into Coldwater Creek in the floodplain and downstream. Moving forward in the timeline in 1973, just wanted to mention there as well, as far as transferring ownership, that's just part of that overall circle of process where someone else takes ownership of specific materials. That's where the private company transported some of that radiologically contaminated material to the Westlake landfill that some of you are also familiar with. But that is not part of FUSRAP. That is a Superfund site out there, but that is part of the overall history to mention. Next slide. Moving forward in the timeline, and mentioned FUSRAP when it came to be. The Atomic Energy Commission, it was part of that program, and FUSRAP was established in 1974. There was some activities throughout that time before the Corps of Engineers took ownership of FUSRAP, and part of those sites being placed under FUSRAP in the early 80s, as well as the St. Louis site being the SLAPs and the Hazelwood Interim Storage Site and Futura Coatings Company placed on the national priorities list. And then in 1997 is when FUSRAP transferred to the Corps of Engineers. Some of those activities I mentioned, I have them highlighted down in blue on the bottom, where there were some support activities from the Department of Energy between 77 and 86, where the piles were actually started. There in the picture there, you can see at the Hazelwood Interim Storage Site, where there was some support activities, and it's a little different than how we do today. We have utility support activities where we will take possession of soil if it's radioactively contaminated and bring it back to our loadout site to be shipped out. So similar but different. In that case, where we are supporting local property owners and business owners to make sure that any activities that they're doing are safe and supported with radiological safety support. Also, some characterization investigations that were done by the Department of Energy between those years, between 1977 and 1998. They kind of contributed to the data that was used to get to a point where we are actually finding contamination and developing a record of decision. But back to the timeline, and when the Corps of Engineers was given FUSRAP and the ability to actually go out and do remediation, immediately started remediating the St. Louis Airport site. So where we're sitting right now, removing over 600,000 cubic yards over those years, even before the ROD was finalized. So that was through a normal process in CERCLA called an engineering evaluation and cost analysis and action memorandum. That's kind of part of the process when the Corps of Engineers got funding and got the authority and then the funding in order to start that mission. Also, removing the piles over at HIS. So that's the above ground contamination that was part of those piles. Moving a lot of that in the very early stages, once again, before the ROD was even signed. And then there's many activities that followed that as well after the ROD was signed to get to the point where we're removing not just the above ground stuff at the HIS piles, but also the in situ or below ground contamination that was part of that overall process of things migrating into the ground or overall around that area. So a lot of work done even pre-ROD per CERCLA to get to a point where the Corps of Engineers was getting straight on the ground and doing excavation and activities in order to start that process and really get the FUSRAP moving for the St. Louis area. Next slide. A little more specifics on the St. Louis side. I mentioned actually over 620,000 cubic yards of contaminated material. That's a historic photo of some of those very early on activities. I think this photo is from around 2000 or so when the Corps of Engineers took over and started doing some of that remediation at the St. Louis Airport site. That tree line there that is the very bottom of that photo is actually Coldwater Creek. So that was a portion, and also that portion of Coldwater Creek was remediated early on as well. Right now, we're currently performing environmental monitoring at the site. We have our loadout area that we continuously monitor, as well as the groundwater and air for any remediation that we're doing. And we also, as mentioned, where we are sitting here tonight, as well as every day when we are out here providing overall project and program management and contractor oversight and technical expertise. We have a dedicated team of individuals that sit out here at the St. Louis Airport site. And that's just another portion of our overall program that we have as far as core personnel, contractor personnel, and our dedicated on-site laboratory, which helps immensely in our overall execution of the program. It helps out with the efficiency for getting testing done and the actual laboratory, as well as helping with if we need to prioritize any sampling, having that on-site laboratory. Next slide. Moving forward into the other sites that are comprised part of the North St. Louis County sites, mentioned the Laddie Avenue properties and our overall progress at that site. So from 2000 to 2013, there was a significant amount of remediation done there as well. Mentioned removing the piles early on in the process, and then moving all of the in-ground stuff. So that was another significant win for the community and getting the contamination that was above ground as well as below ground at those sites, and removing over 200,000 cubic yards from those areas, as well as doing surveys and remediation on some of the surrounding buildings that were contaminated because of some of the migration of dust from those piles off to those buildings as well. There's, just like the St. Louis Airport site, there's also groundwater monitoring that is ongoing at the HIS Futura site. There are contaminated soils under those buildings that this is a historic photo, but those buildings at the kind of the top of that photo there are still there, still in active business, that we work with that property owner if there's ever any support that is needed, as well as doing active monitoring for those buildings. That's part of that overall monitoring program that we have. We are working through the process of getting together the land use controls and the overall, the institutional controls in coordination with the property owner in an effort to get to a point where we're at that point in CERCLA process where we can transfer this over to Department of Energy legacy management for the long-term stewardship. Next slide. The focus of a lot of our staff today, over the past couple years and well into the future, is the St. Louis Airport site vicinity properties. So all of the properties that surround the St. Louis Airport site, as well as kind of around that, the Laddie Avenue area. Laddie Avenue properties are concentrated right next to the Hazelwood Interim Storage Site, and then all the rest of the areas that are part of the inside the red kind of boundary. It's a little difficult to see on the actual on the photo there, but we do have maps on our website as well as our overall status map, and this is a good time to kind of mention that. There's a lot of vicinity properties associated with this site, and that includes the properties south of Dunn Road as well as north of Dunn Road, the properties adjacent to Coldwater Creek. Over the years, we've been able to either sample and remediate, or sample and evaluate individual properties for unlimited use. So you can see that number there where we've been able to do the documentation in accordance with CERCLA to release a lot of those properties, if they need a remediation, or if we were able to sample and verify that they did not need remediation. So that's where that overall number comes. You can see the progress over the years. Over 500 of those properties been able to release for unlimited use per CERCLA. And we still have more to go. A lot of the ones that we have left are areas that we do need to remediate, but there are some that will come out in a form, and we'll do what's called a final status survey evaluation, the documentation that is needed per CERCLA. And also, it's a mouthful, but I'll go ahead and say it. It's one of the documents that we use is called the Multi-Agency Radiation Survey and Site Investigation Manual, or MARSIM for short. I know it's there's a lot of technical expertise that we have on the team that I always like to take the opportunity to commend all of those individuals and the work that they do to get to a point where we can actually say that we are actively releasing some of these properties back to the property owner, the community, for beneficial use. And still making progress in contaminated material shipment to out-of-state licensed disposal facilities. Figure there, more than 300,000 cubic yards already shipped out of state. And then of course, Coldwater Creek, which we'll be talking a little bit more here in the coming slides, is one of those SLAP's vicinity properties. We mentioned at one of our last meetings, and the meeting before, actually, one of the processes that we have, I'm not going to mention it here in this arena, or I don't have a slide for it, but we have a couple explanation of significant differences that are in play that are going through different processes of review and approval right now. But one of those is for the Coldwater Creek properties north of Dunn Road. And that's what is contributing significantly to that number of SLAP's vicinity properties. The original record of decision only had SLAP's vicinity property, Coldwater Creek, as one SLAP's vicinity property, but we needed to be more specific in that. So that's one of the ESDs that we're doing as far as a more of an administrative thing to the record of decision to make sure it is correctly annotated in that overall. And once we have that ESD approved, then that becomes part of the record of decision and the selected remedy. Some more specifics about Coldwater Creek and the overall progress that we have made to date. Significant to mention is how the USACE, when it took over, I mentioned the overall remediation efforts that happened very early on at St. Louis Airport site and his Futura to make sure that we got the sources of contamination that were contributing to Coldwater Creek contamination. So the focus is removing those sources or stopping the spread of contamination to make sure it was not going into Coldwater Creek anymore. And then following that, the individual sampling of all the SLAP's vicinity properties to include Coldwater Creek, that's something that has been going on since the very early stages of the Corps of Engineers getting the program. DOE did conduct some limited investigation in Coldwater Creek as far as the banks and the sediments on those areas there. And that was part of what helped to develop the overall data set for the remedial investigation that contributes to the CERCLA process and getting to a record of decision. And of course, much more sampling needed to be done. So in 2012 is when we started the initiative to go and sample more extensively the Coldwater Creek area inside the bank to bank and also the adjacent properties in the floodplain area. To date, we've taken just for Coldwater Creek alone more than 40,000 samples from that 14-mile stretch from St. Louis Airport site all the way to the Missouri River. So a lot of activities and running up and down banks from all the different individuals, myself included, to be able to actually get a sample to the laboratory and analyze, so that gives us the data to develop detailed designs and go and do remediations. Some of those remediations that we've already been able to do because of where the contamination was and its potential accessibility of the public. Those examples of those are the Palm Drive properties, St. Sen Park, the Chez Paris area, as well as Duchesne Park, and most recently the Creek Bank near at the Hazelwood School District property near what used to be Jenna Elementary. And that's going to continue on for the foreseeable future is we are dedicated to having individual crews making sure we are remediating areas along Coldwater Creek that have the highest possibility for human contact as doing other remediation activities. So the goal of the program is to do everything that we can to try and do as much remediation as possible within a given fiscal year and within our overall ability it comes from a funding standpoint or logistics or available environmental contractors. Several things go into play with that, but I think there's a lot of focus by this team to make sure we're looking at every aspect and all of the completed remediations that we've done along Coldwater Creek to try and do things as efficiently as possible and utilize and try to take lessons learned into account and try to incorporate that into our overall planning process for future remediations on Coldwater Creek. Slide. That does lead us into where we're at in the overall progress. The map here is just north of Dunn Road and the individual areas along Coldwater Creek that we do need to address. This is one of the maps that is available on our website. This is an initiative. This map is something that we took to make sure that we're updating the community via this method with the meetings that we're having, as well as putting these pictures out there or figures to show where the contamination actually is. This is in addition to all the individual coordination that we have with property owners. Every single area here on the map that has some sort of color associated with it has had some type of coordination with a property owner. Some of those green areas, we've been able to do some investigation and then follow on remediation or the investigation and successive documentation so that we can release those properties. And then the red dots are areas that we do need to address and go develop some type of a remedial action in order to actually get to a state where we're satisfying the record of decision requirements for this area. One of the things that I always like to highlight in any meeting is the overall coordination that we have had with property owners. We're very appreciative of all of the feedback that we've gotten, as well as the cooperation from a lot of the property owners along the Coldwater Creek and the floodplain area. And we want to thank everybody, and moving forward, our overall coordination and rights of entry process, it can be a little concerning to some, but it's just part of that process. And for us to gain access to properties along Coldwater Creek to go and do that sampling, it's a process that we do need to follow. So I appreciate all the efforts of the individual properties as well as the real estate team to make sure that we're doing things in accordance with our authority and getting those access agreements for that. The sign that you see on the left side of the screen is something that we had that initiative with that. I'll have to, the man sitting beside me, Colonel Pinero, I'll have to give him a lot of credit on that one, and his leadership. I definitely thank him for that, and the ability to work within our authority, as well as working with the local community and agencies, as well as local elected officials, to make sure that we are getting something to the community that will help the overall process moving forward. The signs are really an extension of our overall inspection program. We were already going out and doing inspections of a lot of these sites, and the signs kind of help identify those areas for individuals to make sure they're not digging in some of the areas that are contaminated. So that's another level of specificity that we use with the overall sign program. Is every area that we do have the right of entry, as mentioned, we're going to, and the approval from the property owner to place, is when we'll actually be going out and putting a lot of these signs. We've made some good progress to date on that, and putting over 80 signs in the ground on a number of different properties. And as we move forward and get individual concurrences on a lot of those properties, we'll continue that effort. Next slide. Moving forward into the current activities that we have going on, in addition to these, to the signs and the overall investigation processes, the remedial activities that we are doing. Right now, we're completing some of the restoration activities for McDonald Boulevard, just outside of where we're sitting here at the St. Louis Airport site, as well as the McDonald Bridge area. I hope I don't sound like a broken record saying I want to take the opportunity to thank, but in this case, the St. Louis County Department of Transportation and their efforts and their ability to kind of work with us and their overall schedule to replace McDonald Bridge. We appreciate all of that, to be able to actually go in there, do remediation after demolition of the bridge, as well as giving us access to McDonald Boulevard to come in and do remediation for contamination underneath the road that would have otherwise remained inaccessible if it wasn't for that overall coordination with the St. Louis County and that opportunity to go in and do that remediation. So once again, wanted to give thanks and give credit where credit is due on that one, as well as our technical team and their extensive efforts over the years plural, to work with the St. Louis County in order to get that initiative done. Other activities that we have going on right now are a property called BP 38 that is on Laddie Avenue. That's where we, some of you may be familiar, that's where we used to have our old office trailers as well as our laboratory right there on Laddie Avenue over the years. And in 2019 is when we established our new laboratory and new facilities over here to be able to actually consolidate those operations and have those up, and also open up that area for the remediation that is happening now. The next bullet there is we have some tree clearing going on. That's a property that is just south of St. Sen Park, that previous remediation that I mentioned, and working with the property owner there there's some contamination near Coldwater Creek. So this is once again another area that we're moving forward as far as contamination near Coldwater Creek. And in the future, you're going to see extensive activities like this, whether it's tree clearing or additional sampling that we need to do to inform our overall design process, this is one of those areas. The next bullet that I have there is, we call it one of Coldwater Creek. That's an area that is not far from the St. Louis airport site. But as we move on in our overall progress and our schedule for remediation in Coldwater Creek, this is one of those areas that's close there that we will continue to do remedial activities on, that's kind of close to the site, that's able to help us with just keep crews actively remediating on Coldwater Creek while we're still doing preparation activities on some of the other areas in that previously mentioned bullet there near Elm Grove Avenue. The next bullet is continuing activities and working with the Cades Cove residents. We have a lot of activities that have gone on in the real estate aspect and working with those property owners, as well as additional sampling for some of the residents that back up to Coldwater Creek along and that are near the 6 properties that we are working with to do the remediation on here in the late or early 26. So that's an overall initiative where Colonel Paneer, myself, and a couple other members in the room met with some of the Cades Cove property owners to go over that overall process, let them know, in addition to the coordination that we've already been doing with the property owners. And, you know, we heard some individuals in the community around the Cades Cove area, as well as the overall investigation process, and want to make sure we're being responsive to that. So we have an additional sampling initiative going on for some of those properties that are near the 6 that we are working with, just in order to give more data and more confidence in that overall remediation that we're doing for those 6 properties, and help us with that overall process for when we do get to a state where we are finalizing and get done with remediation, and those areas can get back to once again the documentation that I mentioned earlier for unlimited use. The next bullet there, is the inspection program that I mentioned, and that overall sign installation initiative, and then the environmental monitoring program, as well as all of the site updates that we have been giving and alternating between virtual and in-person activities. That was another area where hearing from the community that there are some that preferred virtual, some that preferred in-person. So we wanted to make sure that we are continuing that battle rhythm and giving those updates. Not to mention, we always have our contact information that's at the end, but I'll go ahead and mention it now. That's an ongoing thing that we always do as far as responding to inquiries from both property owners, interested members of the public, and the media through our dedicated FUSRAP email address and phone number. Next slide. This was mentioned on the previous slide with the current activities, but wanted to give some more specifics associated with what we are doing from an overall inspection standpoint. We have crews going out continuously to monitor the areas of known contamination along Coldwater Creek. So referring back to one of the slides and the maps where we have those red areas identified, we have dedicated crew members that actually go out and do inspections of those areas quarterly, the in-person inspections, as well as taking photos. And inside the creek, we also have unmanned aerial vehicles or drones doing flights of the area for some of those hard to get to spots of contamination along the creek, in the creek banks. And just part of that overall process that we want to make sure that there's to try and see if there's any areas of disturbance, and if there are, address it appropriately. Case in point, where there was a tornado that came through the area a few months ago, we immediately went out to do inspections of those of the areas of the where we had identified contamination, and if there was anything needed to be done, such as maybe placing some oil, replacing some of the cover that we had put over some of these sites, any area along the creek that we have what's considered surface contamination. That is in that first interval of 0 to 0.5 or 0 to 6 inches. We have placed cover material over those areas to make sure that as an added measure so it doesn't get disturbed. If there were any areas that like that do get uncovered, that's part of that inspection program where we have crew members that are going to and remedy that situation. Next slide. The monitoring program that we have has been going on from the very beginning to include groundwater, air, surface water, Coldwater Creek water. Another initiative as we move forward and do more remediation down Coldwater Creek, we have crews going out and installing groundwater monitoring wells. Per our record of decision, that's part of the remedy, is to monitor groundwater to make sure our activities that we are doing as far as remediation are not affecting the groundwater. So just recently behind the Cades Cove subdivision, we've installed a couple groundwater monitoring wells. The overall process is you want to establish a baseline to see what the groundwater is actually reading, and then throughout that process of remediation and then post remediation to verify that what we are doing is not affecting any of the groundwater. That's just kind of that part of that overall initiative, and as we move forward, you'll see that happening as well at the remediation sites that we're going to be doing in the near future. Okay, that is the end of the presentation. And I had mentioned our contact information that we do have on the slide, our dedicated website, as well as email address and phone number, and the numerous amount of documentation that we have on our site. We have what's called an electronic reading room that has the administrative record on it. And also to mention, there's a lot of good fact sheets on the website that have information. For anyone coming into the process, even in the Corps of Engineers, sometimes if we get new team members, there's a lot of difficult technical aspects of the program, of the CERCLA process, that some of the materials that we have on our website are very informative and very beneficial to that overall understanding and helping kind of bring everyone along in that process. And that's our overall goal here, is we want to make sure we are continuing the communication, continuing the outreach and education for everyone in the community so that we're all going along in this process together. That's part of this initiative that we're doing with these update meetings. And as well, I mentioned earlier, the EPA's establishment of the community advisory group and helping that group move along in that overall process, and helping if there's ever any suggestions for fact sheets, suggestions for initiatives for our overall program. We want to hear those, so feel free to email those to us and send those thoughts to us. And with that, I believe we're moving on to our next phase of our meeting here, unless there's anything that any of the team members wanted to add, and we can start going through some of the questions.
All right, everyone, just as a reminder, we're going to get to as many questions as we can. We have about 30 so far. So we're just going to start at the top and we'll work through them. Any questions that aren't answered this evening, we will answer them with a written response, and that response will be posted on our website. The contact information for us is in the chat as well as on Phil's slide. And the meeting recording will be posted along with the questions and answers as well. So the first one we have is there any way to make the federal property restrictions show up on the actual deeds to make doing phase 1 assessments easier?
That's a good question that I do not have the answer to. Right now, I mentioned our authority to do things, and that definitely is not something that is in our wheelhouse. So that's something that we would have to reach out to another agency. There are initiatives with the state that have certain environmental documentation associated with individual properties, but that's not something that we actually have. If at any point in time anybody wants information about a specific property and you have a specific initiative or interest from a property owner, feel free to reach out to us and we will definitely provide any documentation that we can.
Okay, next is there a close-up aerial photo of the downtown site?
Harvey, I do believe we have a lot of aerial photos of the downtown site as recent and historical. So that's something we can look at if Fitzgerald, if we need to update any photos of things like that, then we can kind of work together, Harvey. And I think that now that we have a continuing ongoing relationship with the CAG and everything, I think that's something we can definitely take a look at. So.
All right. What was the impact to the Missouri River? This question was asked during the North St. Louis site history.
I think that's a great question because, of course, as mentioned, and if you just look at a map, you can see how Coldwater Creek empties into the Missouri River. And it's an uncomfortable reality, if you will, that once contamination or contaminated sediment enters Coldwater Creek, especially in a high flow scenario, and that's how it really got to that point when the area was being inundated with rainfall and contamination that was adhered to some of those soils actually entering Coldwater Creek. It got to the Missouri River, and of course, a bigger body of water is going to dilute that sediment that had radiological materials attached to it even more. So from a technical standpoint, once it gets to the Missouri River, it is so diluted that you can't even detect it. And I'm talking about historical back in the day of when that actually happened. And that is one of those realities that you kind of look at and you face. That doesn't take away from our initiative. We actually are doing some additional sampling at the mouth that is there at the Missouri River to verify that. But that's part of that overall investigation process. As we move forward and go down to the end of Coldwater Creek, we're also doing some additional sampling around Missouri River to kind of verify that overall technical concept and that overall that conceptual site model that we have that shows how contamination got into Coldwater Creek and may have been deposited in certain areas.
Okay. Why do the slides omit the Coldwater Creek soils that were removed from the creek/flood zones and used in construction fill dirt?
The slides kind of focused on our initial activities and what we are doing. We do have initiatives where we are looking at aerial imagery, historic photos to identify any areas that may be associated with things like that. So that's not something we are completely omitting, but that's an area of that process. And as mentioned, it's an investigation process. A lot of work was done to get to it where we're at and the contamination the sampling that was done in Coldwater Creek and the floodplain area. So as we move further and as we continue to sample all of the floodplain areas, of course, we continue sampling until there's no more contamination. And then, but we do also look at historical photos to make sure if there's any areas that we do need to target the area or a specific elevation that would be associated with it if there were ever any soils moved or things like that. That's something we are also looking at as well, but not necessarily pointed out to on the slides.
Have the homes that flooded over the years near the creek been tested?
We have not done any specific testing inside homes. That's something that we have done over the years is tested up to the floodplain area. And if there is contamination that goes up to a home's foundation, that is something that we would go in and actually do some sort of a testing on that area there. A lot of the flooding we've taken, so we've gotten photos from property owners and things like that. So case in point, at St. Sen Park, we had some photos from property owners where flooding went up further in an area and we knew there was contamination in St. Sen Park, so we extended our overall sampling grid, and that helped us to actually extend that sampling grid. So we continue to do sampling. Part of that overall sampling is primarily just doing the soil sampling outside the homes.
Okay. Will the soil around the tributaries to Coldwater Creek be tested?
We do sample tributaries of Coldwater Creek. So where those tributaries actually enter Coldwater Creek, we sample and continue to go on. If you look at the map, you'll find that a lot of those tributaries are part of the floodplain that we do sample. So we start the sampling at the mouth of those tributaries and continue on into the up near the 10-year floodplain, and if needed, continue to go further.
Okay. Can homeowners request their home to be tested? If yes, where can they make that request?
Their home properties or backyards or yards that are associated with Coldwater Creek and the floodplain area there, we've done a lot of coordination with property owners to sample a lot of those areas, and if need be, continue in our sampling grid. And if, like I said, if there was contamination that goes up to a foundation, that's something we would entertain as far as going and doing testing inside a home. But if there's an area that is kind of outside of I'll say it again, our authority, our actual area that we are investigating, there's a lot of companies out there that are fully capable of actually going in and doing any type of testing that a homeowner may feel that they need or be comfortable with. We can't specifically give you a company. We can't endorse any company, but if there's a search for companies, and there's also mechanisms with the Missouri Department of Natural Resources to look into to try to help in that overall understanding and the process to help with individual homeowners that may be outside of our authority to actually go sample.
Okay, I think you just answered this, Phil, but how can I get the soil tested by my house, which is Coldwater Creek? I think we just covered that. This was a comment. Please show a map of the groundwater testing area.
We do have maps of all of the groundwater wells that are within our overall monitoring program. So on our website, we have what's called Environmental Monitoring Data and Analysis Report, where all of those individual results and that evaluation associated with our monitoring program is kind of in that MDAR for short. So that has a map that has all of the individual wells that we monitor on there.
Have you traced the distributaries off Coldwater Creek, and have they been tested? I believe that should be tributaries. And I think we covered that. Next question, how far did the dust from Laddie Avenue travel?
That we know that the HIS pods that were there, that dust did go into the adjacent buildings. That's an area where we did find the contamination and did remediation several years ago for those properties. So one of the things that you do on a contaminated site, and one of the things specifically for that area there, is you do modeling and try to see what would cause dust to migrate off a site. So this is an area where you do the overall monitoring, you do the evaluation and modeling to see where the contamination may have gone. So that was something that was done in the worst case scenario if a tornado came through and actually did that, and the actual migration of dust off site doesn't go that far. And that is verified by some of the sampling that we had done throughout the site and near the Hazelwood Interim Storage site and their overall Laddie Avenue.
Okay. Local news said it takes over 2 weeks to get the results samples? Why? And is there anything that can be done to speed this up?
The part of the process of sampling is a lot of behind the scenes work. So once you take a sample from the earth and transport it over to the laboratory, it'll go through a process. Just at a high level, that sample of dirt has to be broken down into different a media that can be analyzed. Sorry. And in order for that to happen, there's potential grinding and drying process to go through the laboratory and get it down to a very small portion and separate it out into the analytes that we do analyze for. So you can't really speed that process up because it is a very detailed, oriented, and specific process that we follow in order to analyze samples. That process is verified and part of our accreditation program that we adhere to. It's called the DoD ELAP, or DoD Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program. So that's something that is not not specific to our site, but that's something that we follow. There are ways that you can speed up certain ways or certain analysis, but the overall analysis to get to what we are searching for, and that is the thorium-230 number, definitely takes a while, not to mention the overall data validation process as well. So that's why it does take a while to actually get to a point where it's usable data.
Well, I'm just going to add to that. So we have sped the process up because we have a lab on site. And so that lab on site tests specifically our samples only. And that allows us to get our samples and have them analyzed immediately and give us results back as quickly as we can, as opposed to having to send them out to a lab somewhere where it would sit in a queue with everything else from around the nation that's being sent to that lab, and we'd have to wait for those results.
When will the remediation along Coldwater Creek behind Fox Tree Drive start? And what will the extent of that be? How long will it take?
We are looking to start that remediation within the next few months. That's coordination with the property owner, and we, like I mentioned earlier, kind of the tree clearing that we were doing, and the extent of the remediation is depicted on our status maps. So if you're able to pull up any of a portion of our status map that's available on our website, that the first portion that is just north of Dunn Road has a red area that is adjacent to Fox Tree. And that's the area that we're targeting for remediation in our next phase. That's going to take
At least a year.
phone a friend.
Yeah.
That's going to take approximately a year when it comes to pre-remediation activities, remediation activities, and then post-remediation activities to include the restoration of that area there. So another extensive portion, and and you do see it's a pretty extensive area that we do need to remediate when you look at that map.
There's 6 properties plus the creek thing.
Okay, yeah. So Joanne just mentioned that actually includes 6 properties in that area plus the creek bank, and the creek bank is one of the most challenging things that we have encountered thus far as remediation and being able to remediate in an active stream. And once again, commending all of the individuals associated with that overall design, remediation, and restoration process that we've been able to achieve thus far, and moving forward, we'll continue to do so.
Okay, the next one was regarding map 7, which was on slide 13 for you, Phil. Cypress Creek shows green, but the mouth of that creek system that connects to Coldwater Creek is yellow and red. There's a few questions. Where have the samples been taken in that green area?
I don't have the specifics in front of me, Ashley, and this is
Cypress Creek is on the other side of the airport.
This is, so
Oh, it's not.
when.
No, it's
when-
not on the side of the creek. It's over by Patterson Road. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine. And this is, it's, some of the questions that deal with specifics are hard to answer in this setting because we need to dive into the details of the overall investigation report. There's a summary report that we'll do for the sampling that we're doing. We're willing to sit down and kind of talk about that stuff. And this is kind of how I mentioned a lot to please reach out to us with specific questions that you may have. And we are more than willing to sit down and go through any of those areas where we, especially if we have a map to look at and any documentation associated with that. That's very beneficial when it comes to some of these questions that have to do with the very specific information that it is difficult to kind of come up with. It. We have it, but it's not at the top of the head of many individuals in here as far as that goes, if that makes sense.
And it show up in the final set of survey evaluation.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, Ashley, if you want to give the Public Affairs Office a call tomorrow, we can set up a time to chat with you about those questions specifically, and we'll make sure we have that data in front of us. And we'll schedule something with you if you don't mind. I'll also drop my email in the chat once we're done here. Okay. Back in the 50s and 60s, my sister would tell me how the paint on our porch would yellow, develop brownish spots, and begin peeling. She also mentioned the air would smell in the neighborhood and that it burned their eyes. We lived about 100 yards or so from the creek, which flooded our yard and vegetable garden yearly.
We hear personal anecdotes a lot, and we appreciate those stories, and we want you to keep coming with us with those. And I'll mention if there are specific properties associated with a lot of this stuff, we don't want individuals to post specific information about your property or a property you may have lived at, but we're more than willing to kind of help you out with any information that may help in that overall process and understanding what may have been in an area or where your property was associated with the creek and at any given time like that. So.
Okay. Are you asking property owners to post signs in private yards when you begin testing those yards or associated Coldwater Creek banks? Are people whose property has tested positive and are waiting to be cleaned and have not posted caution signs liable if someone goes onto their property and gets sick?
Once again, we work individually with property owners, so it is up to them in their private property. The federal government owns none of these lands, so it's up to those individual property owners whether they post signs or not. As to liability, that is not something that we're to address in this venue. That would be something that is outside of what we actually do or talk about. So.
Okay. Will the recent acid spill interact with the current creek remediation area substances?
This is something that we are aware of and coordinate with other agencies quite a bit. It is, unfortunately, it's not uncommon to hear of things like this, whether it's acid or some other substance entering the creek, because it is an urban stream that has a lot of stormwater runoff, parking lots runoff into Coldwater Creek, though. So from time to time, there will be things like this happening. That being said, as far as the interaction goes, it's not going to interact with the radioactive substances that we have identified in the soil areas along Coldwater Creek. Those areas are, once again, that's adhered to the soil itself and buried for the most part underground, and areas that we monitor from at a normal basis in our overall inspection program.
Okay. What are the flooding impacts for places downstream from where remediation occurs due to the changes in landscape, tree cover, and exposed soils? post-Jana remediation in the area of Greenway, Chase, and Patterson downstream of Jana flooded during heavy rainfall, and community members note this is not a common occurrence in previous history for the area.
I think this overall question can be answered like, as we have mentioned several times in the past, we have extensive monitoring program as well as when there is a flooding situation, such as in 2022, there was a 1,000-year flood. We immediately went out and had crews sampling sediment that was deposited in different areas. We had active remediation going on at the time. We verified that no contamination had migrated off site. So that's indicative of our overall controls that we place and that we hold all of our individual contractors to make sure that we do not have exposed soils migrating off site. So once again, that's
Sorry, Phil, that's a different question. The question is, how are your remediation and how does remediation impact further down because you're changing the landscape? So the water may retain differently in the soils. How are you monitoring? How are you evaluating that before you put a shovel in the ground to say, we're going to take off I don't know, a quarter of a mile's worth of treescape that would normally absorb water, and now that area is bare? What are the impacts to the landscape in the creek further down? It's a different question. I'm sorry.
okay. Yeah, sorry, I misunderstood. We do an overall evaluation with our remedial designs. When we're doing creek remediation, that includes an evaluation of flow in the creek, as well as the post-remediation restoration to ensure that there is no rise. That's a term that you will commonly hear when it comes down to if you're doing any work around a creek area or around some sort of a watershed. So that's simply stated, that's part of that overall process to make sure that we are not affecting or any potential flooding downstream.
This has a few parts. So on the signs, please explain why the signs did not include the major request from the community, which was number one, use of the term attention rather than danger or warning, no use of the radioactive symbol, use of jargon, low-level radioactive materials, and no health risk if left undisturbed.
Once again, this is part of that process where we work within our authority. What we were allowed to do from a technical standpoint, and as far as placing individual symbols on signs, and that what we could do with feedback from elected officials and the community to try to find some middle ground, if you will, between what is what you had put in the chat there and what maybe we had originally thought about putting, which were just notice or just signs that we had up there for to identify areas. So this is kind of that area where we worked with groups as well as local elected officials and national elected officials as well to try to come up with some reasonable area or reasonable sign that we could post. Once again, going back to our actual authority when it comes down to radiation standards and things that you're actually able to post. So that's the best I can do.
Okay.
Phil, could you be more specific? I've
It was
heard that a
not
few
a
times.
unilateral decision. The decision was not unilateral. Elected officials were involved. They're the representatives of their constituents, and they carried that message to us. And they agreed with the signs that were posted in terms of meeting the requirements they had. And so that's where we went with the decision.
And due respect, Commander, but did understand and hear from those elected officials in that particular meeting, and they noted those exact concerns to you all and wanted those kinds of things that I have noted in here in those kinds of meetings. So they brought those concerns. That was their ground they brought to you. You guys created the sign as it is, and I understand that was, to be some sort of halfway, meet of the minds. Could you please tell a little bit more about, from your side, why you all could not be
Yeah.
more specific to the community's requests?
Not a unilateral decision. That meeting discussed the original sign that had a blue background. That's when they voiced all of their concerns. We went back through our headquarters. We worked in conjunction with other agencies. We came up with this sign. We went back to the elected officials with this sign, and they had concurred that this sign met what they wanted.
Okay, thank you, sir. Are you doing any outreach to the residents that live on Elm Grove, Foxmont, and Fox Tree to inform them of what is going on behind their homes?
Yes, great question. And that's something we are wanting to do moving forward, like we did for the residents at Cades Cove. So one initiative is placing the door hangers to make sure that they're aware of activities going on in their areas. And then also we're exploring what we can do from an overall community meeting perspective. Once again, like we did for residents in Cades Cove. So the team and I are kind of working to see what avenue that we have to do some direct outreach to some of those residents that may not be part of the actual remediation like the property owner is, but letting them know what's going on in kind of their neighborhood and what to expect, because there's a lot of heavy truck traffic that's going to be going in and out of there for quite some time now. And we want to make sure they understand that overall process and the safety measures that we do take into place on a daily basis on any area that we are remediating.
Why are Paddock Creek and other portions of Coldwater Creek aquifer that has been renamed after Coldwater Creek was contaminated being erased in 2025 from the FUSRAP maps? I was told on April 23rd, 2025 that they are not covered by the record of decision, but they were Coldwater Creek until subdivisions were built, then renamed. Please correct your maps.
I think I'll just refer back to one of the comments I made earlier about what our maps are now. Our initial investigation process was to sample Coldwater Creek as it is now and the floodplain now, but we are also looking at historical imagery to see if there's ever any evaluations or areas that we do need to target for actual investigation.
Okay. Who will manage, mow, and maintain the Cades Cove properties while remediation is ongoing? Have concerns been expressed about taking back ownership from USACE for the Cades Cove properties post remediation?
So any property that we have access to an agreement with property owner, we are responsible during that remediation process for maintaining that area. And this for Cades Cove specifically, to include the restoration, establishment of the grass in that area there and mowing until we turn that back over, like any other area, when we do an inspection and turn an area back over to the property owner for their maintenance moving forward. That is a pretty consistent process of any area that we do remediation, as we basically, in simple terms, like to put things back how we found them. It's not going to be the case here, but as far as any area that we're going and doing remediation, doing a replacement in kind of certain things, and then turning that over to the property owner for their maintenance moving forward.
And the second part of that question, talking about ownership, at no point through this process does the Corps of Engineers have ownership of these properties. We have rights of entry that allow us to conduct the remediation. The property owners maintain ownership of their property throughout the entire process.
Can you please provide a map with surface level contamination for Coldwater Creek?
I believe that would be kind of a level of specificity that we do not have on our map as far as surface level contamination. I did mention earlier initiative that we do have, that if we have any areas that are at or near the surface from an overall investigation and sampling data, perspective that we're providing and putting cover material on those maps. But if you'd like to see any specifics associated with that, once again, we'd be glad to sit down and kind of go over some of those areas, some of those maps to help with that overall understanding.
Okay, the next one is when the story about the 50s and 60s about the front porch turning a different color, could this be attributed to the contamination that happened during the Manhattan Project activities?
Wait, where are we?
The yellowing of the porch, sorry, the question's way up here.
Oh, sorry.
We're gonna go back up.
Those activities happen. So I think there's decades between them.
No,
Yes,
it was asked again.
this is the initial question from Ed. And the follow-up question to Ed's question or statement was, could this be attributed to the contamination that happened during the Manhattan Project activities during the 50s and 60s?
No,
Radiation.
no, it doesn't. It just from I would say no.
Okay.
That just a
Okay.
I would just say, like, we have no,
Toxicological.
we have no sampling of that paint, right? We couldn't even speculate what was in the air in the 50s and 60s, industrial pollution and other things in the St. Louis area to say that. So yeah, it's a guess we couldn't even make in the dark.
yeah. And another technical answer to that is the levels of radiation that emit from the contamination that was spread into and down Coldwater Creek. Some people don't like to say it, but it was low level and still is even lower level in that case. And it's not something I mentioned, like kind of past experiences, and I've dealt with other areas and dealt with stood watch on a nuclear power plant, done radiation surveys and all that stuff, and dealt with the specifics associated with that. So having that kind of a background and understanding helps with what would be caused by specific levels of contamination, and that's just not something that would happen.
Okay. As in regards to groundwater monitoring, can you please provide a map of the current and to be added wells? Did you hit that one already?
Yeah.
Sorry about
We
that.
talked that one earlier.
Please define conceptual protocols and why you have said that conceptual protocols are being used when no testing was determined to be needed.
Part of the investigation process, and this is not just for our sites, is you have some sort of a conceptual site model that shows you areas that you should investigate. That is only a portion of what we use in order to find out what we need to investigate. So conceptual site model, meaning this is the likely mechanism that happened in order to transport contamination down Coldwater Creek. So this is the likely area that it would have been deposited, like the floodplain and such like that. In addition to the conceptual site model, we'll also use the historical photos, aerial imagery in order to inform our overall investigation process to help us target any other areas that we do need to sample.
Okay. Coldwater Creek runs through a park in Wedgwood subdivision. Has this area had samples tested? And if so, what were the results?
We've sampled near Wedgwood subdivision. This is, I'll say, there's another area where we're looking at historical photographs, the aerial imagery to see if there's ever any area that we do need to expand our sampling.
Okay. Please explain the sample process for well monitoring. How are sediments evaluated in the wells?
So the wells are for groundwater monitoring. So the installing of a well is it's a technical process where you do a drilling down in order to establish kind of a baseline of that area there. Any sediments would be kind of screened out so that you can actually get a true reading of that groundwater. And if there's ever any sediments associated with any of our monitoring wells that are closer to the sites, they're actually, like I said, screened out in that portion of there so we can actually get the water, what we're actually searching for to be monitored.
Okay, the data that supports the findings provided on the North County site maps, are those available in the electronic reading room as well?
No, the electronic reading room has mostly admin record stuff. We do periodically post some of the completion documents on the site if needed, and we also provide those to individual property owners where we don't go and do sampling. That includes a data set and that overall evaluation for those individual properties.
Sorry, I had to miss somebody. Okay. I'm sorry, we just lost our spot there. Hold on just a second,
Right
guys. Oh. Well, my computer hates me too.
You just gotta go down a little bit.
I know. Sorry. Can the Q&A follow-up please be emailed out to the same listserv for the meeting invite?
Yeah, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we could do that.
Mhm.
Okay. The North County site maps 1 and 2 have a scale of 1 to 1,000, and the other maps are 1 to 500. Is there a reason for the change? Also, map 1 of 7 does not have date saved information posted on it. Can you please update the information?
Oh, that's a good opportunity for us to take a look at the maps that we do have on the website and make sure they are the most up to date. And as far as scale information, I'll have to reach out to our GIS folks to see if there's a difference there. There likely isn't. It just probably has to do with the amount of area that needs to be covered in that specific PDF or that specific map. We can take a look just to make sure we have the most up to date maps.
Where we just put them
Oh, okay.
Okay. Is there a map that shows concentration levels of contamination along Coldwater Creek for those that lived along the creek that they could view based on their address?
We don't have the specific levels associated with those areas there. If you do have questions specific to a property, please reach out to us with the information, and we can do our best to try to provide you with that information to answer your question.
If they live along Coldwater Creek, they should have gotten a letter saying where the contamination is on their property. You can give them more
The
information.
lived in past tense.
Oh, past tense. sorry.
Yes, lived. Okay. On slide 9 is omitting construction contamination as a source. That's a comment,
Oh,
not a question. Okay, thank you for that. How many years will it take before you are completely finished cleaning the creek and the properties that are contaminated?
so our current schedule right now has us completing remediation around 2036 with turnover to DOE legacy management in 2038.
Okay. How do you sign up for the meeting listserv?
Email address.
If you send us an email, and our email's up on the slides, we will add you. Considering ATSDR, that's Agency for Toxic Substance Disease Registry, goodness, report from 2019 recommends in-home sampling for homes with flooding. Why has USACE not incorporated this recommendation into the existing process and protocols?
Once again, if there's an area that we do need to investigate to include going into homes where the contamination is going up to the foundation, that we can address that when we find that that actually happens.
Okay. How do you communicate with property owners if you find contamination on their property above background or slash what should be there, but it isn't a level to meet your ability to clean it up? Do you just leave it behind?
We evaluate all of the sampling that we do and the results associated with that against our record of decision and our remediation goals in our record of decision. That information does get provided to the property owner. I mentioned the documentation that we do to ensure we are doing things in accordance with CERCLA. That gets turned over to the property owner. So all that information is available. And once again, it is evaluated against what we have to evaluate against as far as from an overall CERCLA standpoint that satisfies our record of decision remediation goals.
Dr. Jones, I think we answered the complete cleanup question just a few minutes ago. How is vapor intrusion being tracked and traced for homes and buildings with basements outside of Laddie Slaps area? Can you please couple this answer with a map of sampled / found lead-210 along Coldwater Creek?
We do monitoring, so radon monitoring along Laddie Avenue, as well as we do monitoring for external gamma as well with thermoluminescent dosimeters at the area around the St. Louis Airport site loadout area. And then active remediation, we have air monitoring going on as well in there. So that's a portion of our overall environmental monitoring program that once again is available in our MDARs on our website. And then as far as lead-210, it's a daughter product of our primary COCs. And that's something that we did actually make an investment in our laboratory to sample for lead-210 for one of the areas of concern that we had a couple years ago. So there's not a specific map associated with that, but it is one of those kind of daughter products, if you will, and our testing and our overall analysis that we focus on to deliver for the community is making sure that we're identifying those specific contaminants of concern that we are targeting, and that's mainly thorium-230 that drives a lot of our remediation moving forward.
Okay, are you testing the trees you remove? Are they living or did they die?
I think when you're talking about clearing trees.
Oh, okay. So as far as when we do testing of any trees, or sorry, when we do removal of trees, and if we are disturbing any soil associated with where the contamination is, there's a root ball associated with that where we're actually be able to test to check and see if there's any contamination associated with that root ball and do that appropriately. But going back to the levels of contamination that we are dealing with now, once again, completely different than what they may have been back in the day, low-level radioactive contamination, not something that you're actually concerned with from a technical standpoint of actually being uprooted by any trees associated with that. So the actual trees that we're removing get removed and by a qualified tree company and dealt with as they need be. The root ball may be a different story, and that's something that we would deal with as needed.
Okay. Thank you for considering doing the outreach for Fox Tree / Elm Grove. Can I ask that you not delay on that much more? Residents are reaching out to me asking what's going on in that area and if they should be concerned.
Yep, definitely. That's something that, like I said, we have, I'll go ahead and say it. We have always relied on our public affairs shop quite a bit. We are a little limited right now, just because of certain things going on in the federal government, but we are still committed to making sure that we're doing as much outreach as possible within our means. And there's a lot of technical team members that we use as well. So that's something that we can, we're working towards actually getting something together on that.
Karen, if you have someone that we can contact there in that neighborhood to determine what kind of meeting we can have, that would be great.
Yeah, and Karen, if you'd like, my email is in the chat. You can email me directly. This is Brooke in Public Affairs. Email me directly and we will get moving on that.
And I'll just add to that. Thank you for bringing those kind of things to our attention. There is a lot that this team deals with on a daily basis, and we try to think of everything, but we're going to miss some things. And when you bring that up, it's a good light bulb moment for us. Like, yep, should have done that. So we can get on those right away. But if you have someone, anybody online, if you have someone that's reaching out to you about information and concerns, please just direct them to us here, and we can talk to them immediately. And then we'll go back and talk to the community as well.
Okay. Just to be clear, the data that supports the North St. Louis County sites is not available to the public, but it is available for the property owners. Did I understand that correctly?
When you say data, that is a very broad statement. There is a lot of data associated with the record of decision that is publicly available in the administrative record. What is not necessarily publicly available or posted on our website is a lot of the data associated with some of the sampling that has been done post-ROD in order to inform our overall process for design and remediation and eventual release of property owners. That is available to the property owners and available via a FOIA request as well, but it's not something that we just put out publicly on our website.
Okay. Ashley had a follow-up to her question to place a request for the vapor intrusion information. Ashley, please send me an email and we'll do what we can to get you the information you need. Are you on track to complete the 5-year review on time? When do you anticipate releasing the final documents to the public?
We are on track to, and we're currently in a review cycle. This is something we coordinate with the Region 7 of EPA on our overall 5-year review process. So we're responding to comments on that and being able to sign that 5-year review in mid-August. And then after that is signed, that was something that will be released to the public.
Do you know when that will be published? That's a follow-up question.
That's a great question. I would say September.
Okay.
Is a good date.
Okay. The last question we have in the chat is, we purchase bark mulch locally. Can you guarantee that we are not purchasing the radioactively contaminated shredded tree materials from Coldwater Creek?
We've found materials in.
We'll never guarantee anything, but I will say from a technical standpoint that we do evaluate soils and all types of materials along Coldwater Creek, and radioactive trees is not something that we have encountered thus far. And from a technical standpoint, I would not expect to encounter that.
Okay, those are all the questions that we have in the chat. We'll remain on for about 10 more minutes. If some pop up, we will answer them. If you would like, you can submit any other questions to us via our emails, or you can give us a call if you have questions and want to talk to one of our technical experts. Thank you guys for joining us tonight. A reminder, all the questions will be, we'll provide written responses, post to our website along with the recording. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, Cynthia had one more question. What became of the
Tim.
TANA assistance we were going to be receiving? The contact person is.
Yeah, that, of course, that's that EPA initiative, Technical Assistance Needs Assessment. That did result in a task, Technical Assistance Services for Communities. And I believe the EPA has that contact information. They selected a contractor, SKIO, I believe may have been on this call. But that's something that I don't have that off the top of my head, but that's something that we can provide in coordination with EPA Region 7 and that contact there.
Jessica.
Right.
And also there, he's going to be giving a presentation. That's what they mentioned.
Mhm.
He didn't say when, but soon they're gonna put out the notice for his first presentation.
Okay. No, I think that's
Mr.
a good-
Brian from SKIO, if you're on here, would you just say hi?
Hello, this is Brian Mosquito. I've been listening here. Yes, we have a presentation that is in review right now. We'll be scheduling that soon.
We have all been really excited to meet you and excited to hear back from all of our emails we've sent you. We would certainly like to contribute to what you're actually going to be presenting. So that is in coordination and communication with the community. So if you don't mind tagging back with Jess, we would love to get with you.
Yes, will do.
Why don't we just-
All right, everyone, we're gonna go ahead and close the meeting. Thank you for joining us tonight.
So you tell me